What if I told you that the man who discovered gravity spent more time searching for hidden secrets than studying science? A genius who transformed physics, mathematics, and astronomy, yet secretly believed that ancient mysteries, alchemy, and biblical prophecies held the key to understanding the universe. From a lonely boy growing up in rural England to becoming one of history's greatest scientists, Sir Isaac Newton's life was far more mysterious than most people realize. Today, we're uncovering the remarkable story and the secret side of Sir Isaac Newton. Hello everyone, and welcome back to English Orbit. If you enjoy improving your English through fascinating biographies and real historical stories, then you're in the right place. Today's documentary explores the life of one of the greatest scientific minds in human history. Most people know Isaac Newton as the man who discovered gravity. But behind that famous story was a brilliant, mysterious, and deeply private man whose life was filled with ambition, curiosity, and secrets that remained hidden for centuries. So grab your notebook, relax, and let's begin. Childhood and family background. Sir Isaac Newton was born on January 4, 1643, in the small village of Woolsthorpe, Lincolnshire, England. His arrival into the world was anything but ordinary. 3 months before he was born, his father, also named Isaac Newton, passed away. Newton entered life without ever knowing his father. According to family stories, he was born so small and weak that many people believed he would not survive. But against all expectations, the tiny baby who struggled to stay alive would one day become one of the greatest geniuses the world had ever seen. England itself was also going through a difficult period. The country was in the middle of the English Civil War. Political conflicts divided the nation, and uncertainty filled everyday life. Although Newton was too young to understand these events, they formed the background of his early childhood. When Newton was only 3 years old, his mother, Hannah Ayscough, remarried a local minister. She moved away with her new husband and left young Isaac in the care of his grandmother. For a small child, it was a heartbreaking experience. Years later, historians discovered that Newton had written about feelings of loneliness and anger during his childhood. Many believe these early experiences shaped the quiet and reserved personality he carried throughout his life. A lonely but curious child. Unlike many children, Isaac preferred spending time alone. He rarely enjoyed loud games or large groups. Instead, he was fascinated by observing nature. He watched the wind move through trees. He studied the movement of clouds. He carefully observed rain, sunlight, and shadows. Everything around him raised new questions. Why do objects fall? How does light travel? Why do the stars move across the night sky? These were unusual questions for a young boy. His curiosity seemed endless. Instead of simply accepting the world as it appeared, Newton wanted to understand the hidden rules behind it. That desire would later change science forever. School years. Newton attended the King's School in Grantham. At first, he was not considered an exceptional student. In fact, some classmates performed better than he did. But one event changed everything. According to historical accounts, Newton had a disagreement with another student who challenged him academically. Rather than responding with anger, Newton decided to prove himself through hard work. He spent long hours studying every subject he could. Within a short time, he became one of the best students in the entire school. This determination became one of the defining characteristics of his life. Whenever someone doubted him, he worked harder. Whenever he faced a challenge, he refused to give up. The young inventor. Even as a teenager, Newton's imagination amazed the people around him. He loved building small mechanical devices. He created miniature windmills. He designed water clocks. He built homemade sundials that accurately measured time using the movement of the sun. Some neighbors even visited his home, just to see the clever inventions created by the quiet young boy. While others played games, Newton experimented. While others accepted ordinary explanations, he searched for deeper answers. Without realizing it, he was already training himself to think like a scientist. Cambridge University. In 1661, Newton entered Trinity College, Cambridge. The university was one of England's leading centers of learning. At first, the education focused heavily on the ideas of the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. But Newton wanted to learn more. He began reading the works of great thinkers such as Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and René Descartes. These scientists challenged traditional ideas and encouraged observation, mathematics, and experimentation. Newton studied constantly. Sometimes he became so absorbed in reading that he forgot to eat. His notebooks quickly filled with mathematical formulas, scientific observations, and new questions about the universe. He wasn't interested in memorizing facts. He wanted to discover entirely new knowledge. The plague that changed history. In 1665, a deadly outbreak of the Great Plague spread across England. To stop the disease from spreading, Cambridge University closed its doors. Students were sent home. For many people, this interruption seemed like a disaster. For Isaac Newton, it became the greatest opportunity of his life. He returned to his family home in Woolsthorpe Manor, where he spent nearly 2 years in isolation. Away from classrooms and professors, Newton devoted all his time to thinking, reading, and experimenting. These years later became known as his miracle years. During this period, he developed revolutionary ideas that would forever change mathematics, physics, and astronomy. Few people in history have accomplished so much in such a short time. The Apple Story. One of the most famous stories in science is the tale of the falling apple. According to later accounts, Newton was sitting in the garden at Woolsthorpe when he saw an apple fall from a tree. Whether the apple struck his head is almost certainly a myth. But seeing it fall inspired an extraordinary question. Why do apples always fall downward? Why don't they move sideways or upward? What invisible force pulls everything toward the earth? That simple question led Newton to develop the theory of gravity. He realized that the same force pulling an apple to the ground might also keep the moon in its orbit around the earth. It was a revolutionary idea. For the first time, one explanation could describe both everyday events on Earth and the movements of objects in space. The birth of a genius. During those same years, Newton also began developing a completely new branch of mathematics that later became known as calculus. He studied light passing through glass prisms and discovered that white sunlight is actually made up of many different colors. Piece by piece, idea by idea, the lonely young scholar was quietly building the foundations of modern science. Almost no one knew what he was doing. There were no newspapers celebrating his discoveries. No worldwide recognition. Only one brilliant mind, working alone in silence. But very soon, the world would discover his genius. And with fame would come rivalry, obsession, and secrets that few people have ever heard about. Part 2, Fame, Secrets, and the Hidden Obsessions. A scientific revolution begins. By the late 1660s, Isaac Newton returned to Cambridge University with ideas that would completely transform science. The quiet young man who had spent 2 years in isolation was no longer an ordinary student. He had developed groundbreaking theories about gravity, mathematics, and light. His professors quickly recognized his extraordinary talent. In 1669, at only 26 years old, Newton became the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, one of the most respected academic positions in England. It was an incredible achievement for someone so young. But despite his growing reputation, Newton remained a private man. He disliked attention. He rarely spoke about his discoveries, unless he was absolutely certain they were correct. Perfection mattered more to him than popularity. Unlocking the secrets of light. One of Newton's earliest scientific breakthroughs came while experimenting with glass prisms. At the time, many scientists believed that colored light was created when sunlight passed through glass. Newton wasn't convinced. He carefully darkened a room and allowed a narrow beam of sunlight to pass through a prism. The result amazed him. The white light separated into a beautiful spectrum of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. He then passed those colors through another prism. Instead of changing again, they combined back into white light. Newton realized something revolutionary. White sunlight wasn't pure at all. It was actually made of many different colors. This discovery changed the science of optics forever and laid the foundation for our modern understanding of light. Writing a masterpiece. In the early 1680s, another scientist, Edmund Halley, visited Newton with an important question. What kind of path would a planet follow if it were pulled toward the sun by gravity? Newton calmly replied that he had already solved the problem years earlier. Halley was astonished. He encouraged Newton to organize his research into a book. After years of intense work, Newton published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, often simply called the Principia, in 1687. Many historians consider it the greatest scientific book ever written. Within its pages, Newton explained the three laws of motion and introduced the law of universal gravitation. For the first time, the movement of falling apples and the motion of planets could be explained by the same universal laws. It completely changed humanity's understanding of the universe. The three laws that changed the world. Newton's first law explained that an object will remain at rest, or continue moving in a straight line, unless acted upon by an outside force. His second law showed how force, mass, and acceleration are connected. His third law introduced one of the most famous principles in physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Today, these laws are used in everything from engineering and aviation to robotics and space exploration. Centuries later, they remain among the foundations of modern science. The secret side of Newton. Most people remember Newton only as a scientist. But history reveals another side of him that remained hidden for generations. In secret, Newton devoted thousands of hours to studying alchemy. Alchemy was an ancient practice that combined chemistry, philosophy, and mystical ideas. Many alchemists believed it might be possible to transform ordinary metals into gold or discover the legendary philosopher's stone, a substance thought to hold extraordinary powers. Modern science has shown that these goals were impossible. Yet Newton spent years conducting experiments with metals, minerals, and chemical reactions. He filled thousands of handwritten pages with notes that he never intended the public to see. For centuries, many of these papers remained hidden because later scientists feared they would damage his reputation. Today, historians see them as evidence of Newton's endless curiosity. He wanted to understand every mystery the universe had to offer. A man of deep religious beliefs. Another little-known fact about Newton is that he spent more time studying religion than physics. He carefully analyzed the Bible, ancient history, and early Christian writings. He believed that many important truths had been lost over time. Newton wrote millions of words about biblical history, prophecy, and theology. He even attempted to calculate the dates of important future events mentioned in Scripture. However, he kept many of these beliefs private because expressing certain religious opinions in 17th century England could be dangerous. His scientific genius and his religious studies existed side by side throughout his life. To Newton, both were different paths toward understanding God's creation. The lonely genius. Despite his worldwide fame, Newton lived a remarkably private life. He never married. He had no children. He trusted very few people. Most of his time was spent reading, writing, experimenting, or thinking. Friends often described him as quiet and deeply focused. But he could also be extremely sensitive to criticism. If someone questioned his work, Newton sometimes reacted with surprising intensity. He preferred working alone rather than sharing unfinished ideas. His perfectionism helped produce brilliant discoveries, but it also made relationships difficult. The Great Rivalries. Newton's career was marked by several famous disputes. One of the most well-known involved the German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Both men claimed to have developed calculus independently. The disagreement soon became one of the greatest scientific controversies in history. Supporters on both sides argued passionately over who deserved the credit. The debate lasted for years and divided Europe's scientific community. Newton also had a difficult relationship with Robert Hooke, another brilliant scientist. Their disagreements over optics and gravity became deeply personal. These rivalries revealed a side of Newton that many people never expected. Behind the calm appearance stood a man who fiercely defended his ideas and reputation. The most powerful scientist in England. In 1703, Newton became president of the Royal Society, Britain's leading scientific organization. It was the highest honor a scientist could receive. From this position, he influenced scientific research across the country. Young scientists admired him. Governments respected him. Universities studied his work. By the beginning of the 18th century, Isaac Newton had become the most famous scientist in Europe. His discoveries had transformed mathematics, astronomy, and physics forever. Yet another unexpected chapter of his life was still waiting. One that had nothing to do with classrooms or laboratories. Instead, it would place the world's greatest scientist in charge of England's money and send him hunting dangerous criminals. Legacy, hidden mysteries, and the man behind the myth. A new chapter begins. By the end of the 17th century, Isaac Newton had become the most respected scientist in Europe. His discoveries had transformed the way people understood nature, mathematics, and the universe. But surprisingly, Newton was about to leave the quiet world of Cambridge University behind. Instead of spending his days teaching students and conducting scientific experiments, he accepted a position that placed him at the heart of the British government. In 1696, Newton moved to London after being appointed warden of the Royal Mint. For many people, it seemed like an unusual career change. Why would one of the world's greatest scientists choose to work with money? The answer was simple. England's currency system was in crisis, and the government needed someone intelligent, disciplined, and impossible to corrupt. Newton was the perfect choice. The man who hunted counterfeiters. Most people imagine Newton sitting beneath an apple tree or writing mathematical formulas. Very few know that he also became one of England's most determined crime investigators. Counterfeiting had become a serious problem across the country. Fake coins damaged the economy and threatened public trust. As warden, and later master of the Royal Mint, Newton took the problem personally. He didn't remain behind a desk. Instead, he personally investigated criminal networks. He questioned witnesses, collected evidence, tracked suspects, and built legal cases against counterfeiters. One of his most famous investigations involved William Chaloner, a skilled counterfeiter who believed he could outsmart the government. Newton secretly gathered evidence for months. He interviewed informants, uncovered hidden details, and carefully built his case. Eventually, Chaloner was arrested, found guilty, and executed. The scientist who had explained gravity had also become one of England's most effective crime fighters. Knighted by the Queen, Newton's achievements in science and public service earned him extraordinary recognition. In 1705, Queen and officially knighted him. From that moment, he became known as Sir Isaac Newton. It was a rare honor for a scientist during the period. His reputation extended far beyond England. Scholars across Europe admired his work. Kings, politicians, and philosophers respected his ideas. Newton had become more than a scientist. He had become a national symbol of knowledge and intellectual excellence. The final years. Even in his later years, Newton never stopped learning. Although age gradually reduced his physical strength, his curiosity remained unchanged. He continued reading, writing, and discussing science, mathematics, history, and religion. Visitors often described him as thoughtful, disciplined, and deeply focused. Yet he remained a private man. Many of his notebooks stayed locked away. Few people knew how much time he still devoted to studying ancient history, biblical prophecy, and alchemy. To the public, he was the world's greatest scientist. But in private, he remained a lifelong seeker of hidden knowledge. The death of a legend. In March 1727, Isaac Newton passed away in London at the age of 84. His death marked the end of one of the most extraordinary lives in human history. Britain honored him with one of the highest tributes possible. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, where many of the nation's greatest kings, queens, and heroes rest. Thousands of people attended or paid tribute. His funeral reflected the enormous respect he had earned during his lifetime. The lonely child from Woolsthorpe had become one of the greatest minds the world had ever known. The hidden papers. For many years after Newton's death, historians believed they understood his life's work. But they were wrong. When scholars carefully examined his private papers, they made a surprising discovery. Newton had written millions of words that had never been published. Many of these writings had nothing to do with gravity or mathematics. Instead, they focused on alchemy, biblical history, ancient civilizations, and religious studies. Some historians estimate that Newton wrote far more about theology and alchemy than he did about physics. These hidden papers revealed a different side of his personality. He wasn't interested only in explaining how the universe worked. He also wanted to understand why it existed. This secret passion is one of the reasons modern historians often describe Newton as far more complex than the simple image found in school textbooks. A legacy that changed the world. Centuries after his death, Newton's influence remains everywhere. His laws of motion helped engineers design bridges, machines, aircraft, and automobiles. His theory of gravity became the foundation of astronomy and space science. His work in mathematics continues to guide scientists, economists, and computer engineers. From satellites orbiting Earth to spacecraft exploring distant planets, Newton's ideas remain part of almost every major scientific achievement. Even Albert Einstein, whose theories expanded our understanding of gravity centuries later, acknowledged the importance of Newton's discoveries. Few individuals in history have changed human knowledge so profoundly. Lessons from Newton's life. Isaac Newton's story teaches us several powerful lessons. The first is the value of curiosity. He never stopped asking questions, even when others believed they already had the answers. The second lesson is patience. Many of his greatest discoveries came after years of quiet thinking and careful observation. His life also reminds us that failure and loneliness do not prevent greatness. Some of his most important ideas were developed while he was isolated from the rest of the world during the Great Plague. Finally, Newton showed that learning should never end. Whether studying science, mathematics, history, or religion, he remained a student until the very end of his life. Newton's lasting impact. More than 300 years after his death, Isaac Newton's name is still known across the globe. Students continue learning his laws in classrooms. Scientists continue building upon his discoveries. Historians continue studying his mysterious writings. He was not simply the man who explained gravity. He was a mathematician, a physicist, an inventor, a philosopher, a government official, and perhaps the most curious mind in history. Behind the famous Apple story stood a man filled with questions that never stopped searching for answers. That is the true secret side of Sir Isaac Newton. And that brings us to the end of today's story. From a lonely child in rural England to one of the greatest scientific minds in history, Sir Isaac Newton's journey was driven by curiosity, discipline, and an endless desire to understand the universe. His discoveries changed science forever, while his hidden interests revealed a fascinating side that many people never knew. Thank you for watching English Orbit. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which historical figure you'd like us to cover next. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring history.